Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage counseling, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one sessions and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550. And our website is lifecoachdanamslife.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our 7th episode of season 5, a very special guest and couple sex therapist, Wendy Dumbroff. And just like every of my past episodes, I will leave it up to the guests to probably introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Wendy, the floor is yours, my dear.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Wendy Dumbroff. I'm a therapist in Madison, New Jersey. I come to this field as a second career. I was a pharmacist back in my first life, and I was a full-time mom for a long time. And then I went back to school. Therapy had always been something that I'd thought about even in my early 20s. And I finally reached a point where my kids were old enough that I felt I could manage that. I went back to school. I had a wonderful supervisor who had trained at the Ackerman Institute. And she was such a good therapist that I thought to myself, wow, if I could be 10% as good as she is, I'll be pretty good. So the Ackerman Institute is a couple and family institute in New York City. So I trained there in couple and family therapy. And I found myself very interested specifically in couples therapy. And one of the biggest issues that comes up for couples is sex. And I don't know why in my field, but couples therapy and sex therapy are two separate paths. Mm-hmm. And so they don't teach you sex therapy and couples therapy, and they don't teach you couples therapy and sex therapy. But I felt that as a couples therapist, I really wanted to know more about sex. And so I then pursued some training in sex therapy, and I've been doing that for quite a while.
So let's talk about sex today.
Yes, let's talk about sex.
So I know, especially now, what I've noticed during this pandemic, a lot of people have been forced into isolation, where spouses now suddenly, from what they used to only see each other at night or the weekend, now they saw each other 24/7. Okay, because they're all doing remote work. That basically changed the dynamic in couples. It changed the way that they perceive each other, the way that they communicate with each other, the way that they are intimate with each other, and so on and so forth. So what did you notice during this pandemic and the post? Well, I'm not sure if it's really post-pandemic because we're still in it. What have you noticed as being the most common issues related to sexuality in couples?
That's a really great question. You know, I think we can't even talk about the sexuality without talking about what happens between people and couples, because if you think about it, right, every couple has, when couples land in my office, it's because there's something going on between them that's not working right. So what I undo is I unravel. Literally, I draw it for people. There's something called the vulnerability cycle developed by Michelle Shankman and Mona Fishbane. Michelle is one of the senior faculty at the Ackerman Institute. So that's how I learned about this. And when you unwind something and see what's happening between people, it's usually what happens is somebody does some behavior that triggers some feeling in their partner. That feeling leads to a behavior which triggers some feeling in the opposite partner, which they go back to their first behavior, and the couple goes around and round. So when there is all this concentrated time together without all the normal things that we do and all the distractions and going out to dinner with some friends or going to the gym outside of the house and going off to work and coming home at the end of the day, when people are together all that time with the additional stresses of children maybe doing school from home and two people trying to work from home and the pandemic, right? That cycle sort of can rev up on steroids and things aren't going right. So then what happens to the sexual relationship? Well, the sexual relationship may fall by the wayside. And interestingly, I often find women will say, and I'm being very sexist here, so I know that I'm painting this with a broad brush because sometimes it's just the opposite. I do hear the opposite as well, but oftentimes women say, and I'm speaking, being very heteronormative here as well, it's just heterosexual couples, that women say, I need to feel connected to you emotionally in order to have sex with you. When we've been fighting all day, or we've been like at each other's throats all day, I don't want to go near you. The last thing I want to do is go near you. And men will say, but the way that I feel close is to be connected to you, is to be physical with you. That's how I feel close to you. And when you reject me in that way, then I feel worse. Then they may go into one of those behaviors that triggers their partner, that they get into their cycle and they both step out of it. So yes, I have seen couples just sort of at each other's throats with a lot of conflict. And then of course that takes its toll on the sexual relationship.
So how do you break that cycle, Wendy? If let's say, okay, for example, as we know from Charles Chapman, which is the 5 love languages, which one of them is physical touch. If one spouse is not, the physical touch is not a part of the love language, but one of them or the other spouse is, do they have to force themselves to be able to speak their love language, or how do they find a compromise?
Yeah, that yes, I think that's important. I do talk about the love languages with people, and I encourage people to become bilingual, right? Because to recognize that you may have this need that you want your partner to offer. Maybe it's the
Affirmation.
words of affirmation, right? I love you, you're important, wow, you did such a great job with the kids today. I was really impressed by that. Thank you. Thank you for being such a caring person, right? But you want that from your partner, and your partner needs to know, hey, I need this from you. I need you, even if it's not um, sex we're talking about, as most people think about penetrative sex, right? Maybe it's an increase in affection. Maybe it's yeah, no, that's a bad. That's not a good Freudian slip. Maybe it's an increase in affection. Maybe it is just touching me, or touching me intimately, even if it's not going to be penetrative sex tonight, or allowing me to touch you or hold you, right? I do encourage people to become bilingual, and to have empathy for their partner's needs. But you asked a good question. You said, how do people break that cycle so that they can get into that space where they can move towards each other in that way? And that's so much of the work of the couples therapy that I do. I will often say to people that change is about doing something different. So when they can understand and really see, I literally draw them out this vulnerability cycle. Oh, so when you feel unheard or uncared for, and you are feeling so sad, you pursue your partner in anger.
Right.
And when you pursue him in anger, he feels not good enough, and he shuts down.
Correct.
And when he shuts down, then you feel more unloved, unheard, uncared for, and you pursue more anger, and how that happens. And then to that end, I will also explore, where do those triggers come from? So that includes an exploration of people's families of origin, right?
Mhm.
And why is it that feeling unheard and unloved is such a trigger for you? And why is it that feeling not good enough is such a trigger for the other? And how they cope. Also, we all develop our coping mechanisms in the families we grow up with, and we unconsciously take them along with us into our adult relationships.
Right.
But you can see in our adult relationships, they're not always useful,
Mhm.
right? And so that angry pursuit is not always useful, or that shutting down is not always useful. May have been survival, may have been the only way you were heard in your family growing up, may have been the only way you avoided negative consequences, was to shut down in the family that you grew up in. But when you can see you're doing that, you have a choice. When you have the awareness, you have a choice.
But would you say that, would say 80% or even 90% of all sexual issues in relationship are caused by a breakdown of communication, where they don't know how to express themselves or they just don't know how to listen? Now, there's one aspect of couples counseling that you probably also suggest, which is reflective listening, where you basically ask the one spouse to always repeat, not like a parakeet, but kind of like use their own words or paraphrase what the one person has said, so at least they take accountability of what they want or what the other person want, and they do that back and forth, which allows each and every one of them to say, I heard you, I know what you mean, and this is what we're going to address. But as you and I know, Wendy, in our practice, they don't always practice what we preach them to practice or when we advise them to practice. So how can they do this at home without having to have us as babysitters, or I would say as
Yeah.
expert to tell them, okay, this is what you have to do now and now? They only see us once every week or once every 2 weeks. So what they can do at home to be able to encourage this process ongoing?
That's a great question, right? Boy, if I had the total answer to that, I'd write the book and I'd be really rich. But there are things, right? I think that people can cultivate their own awareness, their awareness of what's happening within themselves, for example. So if they recognize, if that, again, I'm being sexist here, but if that gentleman who shuts down can stop and pause, right? Cultivate his awareness. How do you do that? And this applies to sexuality too, right? Cultivate what's going on in this sexual experience that I might be adding onto it, that's taking away pleasure or making me want to move away from it. But when you can get, what am I thinking? What are my, this is about mindfulness. What are my emotions? What does it feel like in my body? And what comes up for me around this? Oh, I'm about to shut down. The Buddhist nun Pema Chodron says, when you are about to go into your usual habitual pattern that's not useful for you, do something different. One lecture I heard by her, she said, if you have to stand on your head, stand on your head, but do something different. And so to encourage people like, oh yeah, you usually go after with that angry pursuit. Can you calm that down? If you can calm that, that makes this person more able to stay present. If this person is more able to stay present, that might calm the angry pursuit as well, because all of a sudden you're not feeling like your partner disappeared and he's there for you. And so I think self-awareness, I also, I don't think I mentioned it in the beginning, but I'm also trained and a certified teacher in mindfulness and meditation. And I think that I believe, it is my belief, it is something said in the meditation community, the mindfulness community, that awareness is wisdom. And when we have awareness, it's not that we can change what we feel. We can't help the thoughts or the feelings that come to us. If we're anxious, we're anxious. We have to honor, wow, anxiety is here. But we have choice as to what we do with it. Do I let anxiety lead me down that same path that it always leads me down? Or can I make a choice to control anxiety instead of letting it control me? Can I make a choice to control my anger or my feelings, these hurtful feelings that I'm having, this feeling of not being good enough, rather than have it control me? And what I always offer to my clients is, as you're talking about the reflective listening, is that to listen, to hear what your partner is saying, not to respond. You will have your time to respond, but listen to hear and make sure, okay, let me make sure I have right what you're saying. Are you saying that when I shut down and when I walk away, or I just need to get away, that you feel so unheard and uncared for? Yes, that's how I feel. And then you get, what comes out at me is anger. Yes, but really underneath that anger is this pain. Yes, that's what I feel. And of course, it's not the partner's intent to, in all likelihood, to create that feeling in their partner. They're operating automatically on their old coping mechanisms. But awareness gives us time to take a breath, to pause, and to slow down. Yeah.
Now, as you and I know, Wendy, I think God played a really odd game with us where men hit their sexual peak around 18, 19, whatever years old, and women around their 40s. Now, that being said, not a lot of men and women or spouses will be in sync sexually. So, as you said, men are more physical, like creatures. Women are more emotional. So women will always say, well, we've been fighting, so how can I put myself in the mood? Guys will say, well, this is my way to be able to express my love and my caring for you. And so again, there's always going to be some kind of like, like issues in understanding each other's need. And sometimes, in which I've read in many articles, when one of the spouse have the lower sex drive, Wendy, than the other have to abide by it, or they have to kind of like follow their lead in a way. And they cannot just say, well, if you have a lower sex drive, I'm going to get it elsewhere. No, this is not how marriage works. So how can you help people kind of like either the one who has the low sex drive to elevate it, and the one who has too much of a high sex drive to lower it, so they could actually meet halfway?
Right. Yeah. Such a great question. Question of the ages, right?
Yes.
I don't think that innately we can change somebody's desire for sex, but there's a very important concept, and it sounds so simple, but it is about willingness. It is about willingness. There's a lot of studies done in Canada. They actually the government funds the research. So there's a lot of sexuality research up in Canada.
Okay.
And they have come up with this concept of that sex does not have to begin with desire, that sex can begin with willingness. And this is actually a great concept for women who may not have as high a sex drive as their husband, or they say, I'm happy once a week, or I'm happy once a month, or I'm happy once every 3 months. Mm-hmm. And the husband's like, no, that's not going to do it for me, right? Willingness. There is the idea of willingness, because women in long-term relationships, there's been some research, they do tend to lose desire. Mm-hmm. But what they have is responsive desire. So if you have the willingness to engage and begin, you may not have desire, but desire follows, because you kind of start fooling around with your partner and you're like, wow, this actually feels good. And this is why I like sex. This is why I ever wanted to have sex in the first place. And so willingness is a very important concept, I think. Now, on the other side, can the man, and again, we're being very sexist and heteronormative here, but can the man always say to the woman, okay, I want to have sex now, come on, let's go. And she's like, I'm exhausted. Yes. I am so tired. I've had maybe children clawing at me all day. The last thing I want is someone to be touching me. Uh-huh. Can there be compromises on that side too? I don't mind some affection. Or for the man to supplement the sex with his partner with his own masturbation. Okay. And whatever way he finds pleasure in doing that.
Okay. So overall, in your practice, Wendy, when you talk to couples who are either dealing with depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, and with the amount of medication that the psychiatrist just inject in their body, or they have to swallow every single day, that will certainly have side effects, in which the side effects will also compromise the sexual desire in these individuals. Do you feel that there's a way for you to be able to find a balance in between them being or having a chemical imbalance in their mind, having to take medication, but yet the sex drive is completely gone and the other person will suffer, or the other spouse will suffer? How can you not fight with those chemicals, but how can you tell them, well, maybe you should try either a new medication, you should try to compensate with something different that will enhance your sex drive, or by the food that you eat, by the I don't know if there's any Viagra for women, whatever it is, but is there something that you can recommend?
Well, certainly trying different medications, but that's the realm of the psychiatrist. As a therapist, that's not I didn't go to medical school. I don't prescribe medications, even though I was a pharmacist in my last life. I wasn't a prescriber then.
Okay.
That does help me in understanding the human body because I have a fundamental understanding of how the medications work in the human body. Um, but that can be a problem. That is a problem for men and for women at times. But I also like to help people expand their sexual menu, right? Because that's also a problem with aging, right? But does it mean that people who are aging can't have sex? If a man is a lifelong diabetic, at a certain point, he probably will no longer be able to have an erection. But does that mean he can no longer have sex? And so to help people redefine sex and expand their definition of sex. And one of my mentors in the sex therapy field, her name is Suzanne Iasenza, and I love her definition of sex because she defines sex as anything you wouldn't do with your neighbor. And I love that. So maybe you are just holding each other and you're holding each other's naked bodies, or you're cuddling watching TV, or one person is bringing the other to orgasm if the other is too tired or not in the mood. So and by the way, men who cannot get an erection can still have ejaculation and orgasm, with the exception of certain prostate surgeries. I don't know enough about it, but sometimes men no longer ejaculate, but they can still have an orgasm. And so helping couples also to expand their definition of sex, and redefine what sex is in their life if there are certain things that have happened to their bodies or disabilities or medication-induced issues.
So, what would you say the percentage of people or men suffering from ED, erectile dysfunction, is related to medication or depression? Is it primarily because they are under medication that they will experience ED, or is it stress? Is it anything what is the common factor, would you say, based on what you've experienced yourself in the past?
Uh-huh. Well, if a man comes to therapy and says he's experiencing erectile dysfunction, the first thing I will really require is that he's checked out by a urologist just to make sure that everything is okay. Again, the medical part is not my realm, and I don't want to miss anything. And also, by the way, if it's very sudden and a man is of a certain age, also to be checked out cardiovascularly, because the blood vessels feed the penis that causes the erection. And if you have cardiovascular blockage in the vessels of the heart, you can also have cardiovascular blockage throughout. So I do want men to be checked out by a urologist and also, cardiovascularly, and make sure they're fine. And if they are fine, right, and there's no organic reason that can be found for their erectile dysfunction. Again, keeping in mind that as men age, things change just like they change for women. And, a 50-year-old man is not going to have the erection of his 20-year-old body, right? Okay. Things are going to change. But to really explore what else is there psychologically. And that encompasses a whole potential host of things. Actually, when couples come to me, I always do full sexual histories with them, sexual and relational histories with them, because what is it that is keeping them from connecting in the bedroom? And what else is playing into this unconsciously, things that happened? We chatted a little before the meeting today, and that sometimes, so here's an example. There is a person who, either member of a couple, who just is shutting down from sex. And you do this whole history and you can't really find any sexual problem or transgression in their history. Oh, but they had an alcoholic parent who was out of control, right? And they, lived in that environment all the time. And what is sex about? Sex is about letting go, losing control. Women who are unable to have an orgasm with a partner, but they are able to have an orgasm on their own. I'm always thinking, wow, what are they unconsciously trying to control and why? And it makes sense. So somebody who grew up in that environment, so again, those old coping mechanisms, you need to control everything. You need to make sure everything's okay. You can't let go. You can't let go in that way because it feels too unsafe. None of that is conscious, but that's the unconscious telling the body, no, 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 you're getting to a place where you won't have control. That's not okay. You can't let go. Look what happens when there's no control. All hell breaks loose outside
Yes.
that door, right? And so I always do these sexual histories with people. And generally you uncover something that you can kind of tie together to understand what it is. And the mindfulness and the awareness of the person to see, what am I adding on to this in this moment? Why don't I want to be here? Why? Oh, all I notice in my body is tension. And that's when I usually shut down from this sexual connection. I notice tension.
Mhm.
So then we can open up and explore that tension, right? But yeah.
Do you feel, Wendy, that cultural beliefs may also impact the relationship with sex? Because obviously, some people may say that sex is dirty. Sex is not what normal people should really enjoy or appreciate. They just do it for procreation needs. So, do you think that their cultural belief may impact their desire to wanting to have sex?
Absolutely. And one of the things in the sexual history that I will ask people is, what are the messages you got about sex? How did you learn about sex in your family? How did your family talk about sex? What are the messages in your religion, your culture? How does this particular culture believe in sex? What if this person's sexuality is alternative to heterosexuality, and they grew up in a culture where that is forbidden and not allowed or shamed or in whatever reason? So yes, I take into consideration societal context, cultural context, religious, everything, all of that, the family, the meaning, um, the experiences people have, right? Um, oh, people feel shame around sex. So many people feel shame around sex.
Right.
Well, what's that? When you do these sexual histories, well, I remember I was 11 years old and I was masturbating and a parent walked in and I was so shamed for that, right? And those are such penetrating messages that reverberate throughout a lifetime, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. So I
And
look for any messages people are
Well,
getting.
I mean, your thorough examination is definitely a really crucial step in giving them the tools to be able to overcome their, I would say, relationship with sex or belief with sex or whatever else. And but when it comes to people's mindset, because obviously, as we discussed in the podcast here, there's so much involved in sexuality. So for the couples who are listening to this podcast, um, how can they take proactive measures to be able to not to wait till it's too late to go and see a sex therapist or a couple sex therapist, but to start understanding the signs or start feeling that something is wrong, and instead of ignoring it, they better address it. So what are I would say, the phase one before it gets worse?
Yeah. Wow, that's a really nice way to put that and to think about that. So for couples out there listening, or maybe one member of the couple is listening, and perhaps they're recognizing that sex has really declined in their relationship, and it's not talked about, right? Maybe it's the elephant in the room, and to bring it up, to say to their partner, listen, there's something I'd really like to talk about in a calm and gentle way. I'd like to have a discussion.
Okay.
not in the heat of an argument where one says, and you never even have sex with me anymore. And what's that about? But to say something like, I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too, that our intimate physical relationship has decreased. And I'm sad about that. And I'm wondering how you feel about it. And what are you thinking? And just to begin to talk is the first thing, as you talked about communication. And oftentimes sex is such a taboo subject.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And for couples to really begin to get more, one of the things I try and facilitate for couples in the sex therapy is just talking about sex. It's okay to talk about sex. It's okay to ask for what you want, to share what you like, what you don't like, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. There is a whole community, the kink community of sex. They could teach the vanilla sex community a
Yes.
lot about communication, because they have to communicate for safety purposes. And so they do. They really do communicate very well around sex. And it's okay. I think one of the biggest things people think is, oh, there's something wrong with me. Why do I find that arousing? Um, there's nothing wrong with what turns people on, and nobody can help with what turns them on. Really, that's true. Just that is a template. That's why people with sexual fetishes, like I'll use something very generic, like they need feet. They need to include feet in order to have an orgasm. That has to be a big part of it. But sexual fetishes, that it's not going to change, right? That if that is something that turns them on, that's what turns them on, right? And it's not really changeable. That's why it's so problematic with people who are attracted to children, because you can't change that attraction, unfortunately. They can control it. That is not okay to do, right? That is not okay to do. And when I say that anything that turns you on is okay, anything between consenting adults. Consent and adults are the most important words there.
Yeah.
Consenting adults. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, to all the listeners out there, how can anyone contact you, Wendy, to seek your services?
Oh, I have a website. It's wendydumbroff.therapy.com, all one word. I spell my name Wendy with an I, not with a Y.
Oh,
Um,
that's important. Okay,
yes.
good.
And my phone number is 973-937-8651.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, when it comes to the topic of sex, I can go on for the next 6, 7 hours. I have plenty more questions, but obviously, we want to keep people's attention span going. So we're going to have to limit it to what we did today. So I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule, Wendy, to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story and skill set. Now, we hope that you have all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm also very excited for the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 5 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories, just like the one that you listened to today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Sex is as much opening yourself and showing your sexuality to another human being as it is about allowing them to show you theirs. If you want your lover to expand their horizons with you, it's vital that you give them the courtesy of hearing their secret without making them feel creepy about it. Open communication isn't just verbal, it's also sexual. Sharing fantasies between both of you can ignite passion, enhance sexual experiences, and more long-lasting love. So what are you waiting for? Be verbal, be sexual, and be passionate. All this is certainly under your control. My name is Dr. Dan Amzalag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.